What if I told you that a law written more than 2 centuries ago, a law designed for wartime emergencies in the early days of the Republic, has suddenly become the center of a fierce legal showdown over immigration, presidential power, and the fate of thousands of Venezuelans living in the United States? Would you believe it? That's exactly what just played out in a federal appeals court, where judges flatly rejected former President Donald Trump's attempt to invoke the Alien Enemies Act, an 18th-century statute, to deport Venezuelan immigrants he labeled as threats during his administration. At the heart of this drama lies a profound question: how far can a president stretch old laws to fit modern crises, and what happens when the courts push back? To understand the gravity of this ruling, we need to rewind, because the Alien Enemies Act was first passed in 1798, during a time when America feared French spies and foreign saboteurs, giving the president sweeping power to detain or expel citizens of hostile nations during declared wars. Fast forward to now, and that same dusty statute suddenly became a weapon in Trump's immigration arsenal as he argued Venezuelans in the U.S. could be treated as enemy aliens because of deteriorating relations with Nicolas Maduro's government. But the judges weren't buying it. In their ruling, they made it clear that while the United States has serious diplomatic tensions with Venezuela, no war has been declared, no legal conditions exist to justify applying a centuries-old wartime law, and no president can unilaterally redefine enemies just to accelerate deportations. This decision didn't just slam the door on Trump's legal maneuver, it opened a much bigger debate over how immigration is handled, how executive power is checked, and whether politics are being injected into humanitarian crises that affect real families seeking safety. And here's where the tension rises, because the ruling is not only a rebuke to Trump, it also sends a message to the current administration: the courts are watching closely, and creative legal shortcuts won't pass unnoticed. For Venezuelans fleeing political repression, economic collapse, and violence, this ruling is a sigh of relief, but it's temporary, fragile, and contested. Supporters of Trump argue that ignoring laws like the Alien Enemies Act weakens America's ability to protect itself from potential foreign threats, while critics insist that weaponizing outdated laws against desperate migrants undermines U.S. values and international credibility. Meanwhile, the political storm is far from over. In Congress, immigration remains a live wire, with lawmakers split between calls for tougher enforcement and demands for humanitarian relief. In the White House, officials are carefully weighing how to manage the influx of Venezuelan asylum seekers without triggering the same backlash Trump tried to ride. And for the courts, this case may only be the beginning, because the boundaries of executive power and immigration are still being tested daily, with each ruling shaping the future of who gets to stay and who is forced to go. So imagine this: a centuries-old law, a modern immigration crisis, a president's attempt to push boundaries, and a court that said no. But does that "no" really settle the matter, or does it just set the stage for an even bigger fight? Because here's the truth: when the stakes involve presidential authority, national security, and the lives of thousands of families caught between two governments, nothing ends with one court ruling. Trump has already signaled he'll fight this decision, and his supporters are rallying behind him, framing the case as proof that America is vulnerable if its leaders can't act decisively. Legal experts are warning that if the Supreme Court takes up the case, the implications could ripple far beyond Venezuelans, reshaping how every president in the future wields emergency powers. And Venezuelan families themselves remain in limbo, unsure if they'll be protected under temporary humanitarian programs, or if a new administration could once again move to expel them under some reimagined interpretation of presidential power. The story unfolding here isn't just about law or politics, it's about identity, sovereignty, and the clash between America's ideals and its fears. And that raises the question: is this the turning point where the United States finally redefines how far a president can go in the name of security, or is it just another chapter in an endless cycle of legal and political battles? The answer, for now, remains out of reach. Because even as the appeals court slams one door shut, new ones are already opening, and behind each door lies another test of power, another challenge to the system, and another chance for history to repeat itself, or to change forever. And as this fight escalates, the biggest question still hangs in the air, unanswered, pulling us deeper into the unfolding drama: what happens next? And that question, what happens next, is exactly what has every corner of Washington buzzing, because this ruling didn't just stop one legal argument, It ripped open a wider battlefield where politics, law, and human lives collide, and now everyone is calculating their next move. In the West Wing, aides to the current president are quietly strategizing, weighing how to balance humanitarian programs for Venezuelan migrants against the inevitable political attacks that come with being labeled soft on immigration, a phrase that still carries explosive weight in every campaign ad and congressional debate. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers are already sharpening their talking points. Some argue that if the courts won't allow the use of historic powers like the Alien Enemies Act, then Congress must act to strengthen the executive's hand, while others see this as a clear signal that America must finally overhaul its outdated immigration system and stop relying on 18th century laws to solve 21st century crises. But here's where it gets even more tangled, because beyond the halls of power, real families are living in fear and uncertainty, wondering if their fate will swing again with the next political shift. In cities like Miami, Houston, and New York, where Venezuelan communities have grown rapidly, the mood is tense. Activists celebrate the court's ruling but warn their people not to relax, because legal victories can be reversed, and promises of protection can evaporate overnight. For many Venezuelans, the United States is their last hope after fleeing a country where democracy is broken, food and medicine are scarce, and dissent is dangerous, but even here, safety feels temporary, fragile, and conditional on the politics of the moment. And the politics are volatile, because Trump's camp has seized on this defeat as proof of judicial overreach, framing the courts as obstacles standing between America and its security, a narrative designed not just to rally his base but to put pressure on the Supreme Court to intervene. Meanwhile, legal scholars are sounding alarms, pointing out that if the Alien Enemies Act can't be applied in this context, presidents may be forced to rethink how they justify emergency measures in immigration, a space where national security and humanitarian needs often collide. But buried in those debates is a deeper, darker tension that few want to speak openly about. If old laws aren't enough, will new ones be written, and if they are, will they expand presidential power in ways that future generations might regret? This is where the suspense thickens, because history shows us that crises, whether wars, terrorist attacks, or mass migrations, often lead to hasty laws that outlast the emergencies that birthed them, reshaping freedoms and rights long after the headlines fade. And yet, as this drama unfolds, no one can say for certain how the Supreme Court will respond, whether Congress will act, or how far the current administration will go to find a middle path that both enforces order and protects lives. Imagine the weight of that uncertainty pressing down on families who don't know if they'll be able to stay, on border agents who don't know which rules to follow tomorrow, on judges who know their decisions ripple far beyond one case, and on politicians who know every choice could tip the scales in the next election. And here's the kicker, behind closed doors, both parties are gaming out how this fight could reshape the political map, because immigration isn't just a legal issue, it's a wedge issue that moves voters, and in an election season where margins are razor thin, every narrative, every ruling, every migrant story could sway hearts and minds. The current administration faces a dilemma: lean too far into enforcement, and risk alienating progressives who demand compassion, lean too far into humanitarian relief, and risk feeding the perception of weakness that opponents are eager to weaponize. And hanging over all of it is the looming possibility that this isn't just about Venezuelans, but a test case for broader questions. Could future presidents attempt to use the same logic against migrants from other nations? Could the Alien Enemies Act be resurrected in ways we can't yet predict? Could Congress, instead of restraining executive power, hand over even more? The court has drawn a line in the sand, but lines in American politics rarely stay fixed for long. The media is already spinning the ruling as both a triumph of judicial restraint and a dangerous setback for national security, depending on which channel you watch, and that narrative war is shaping public opinion before the next phase of the legal battle even begins. And it will begin, because Trump's team has vowed to appeal, and once the Supreme Court is in play, the stakes escalate from high to historic, with justices weighing questions that cut to the heart of the Constitution. How much power should one president hold in moments of crisis, and who decides when those crises exist? But don't think this is just a courtroom drama. This is playing out in neighborhoods, detention centers, campaign rallies, and diplomatic backrooms where Venezuelan officials are watching closely, knowing that U.S. policy could tilt the balance of power in their region. And yet, despite all the noise, despite all the debates and legal filings, the most haunting part of this story is how unresolved it feels. How every development seems less like an ending and more like a doorway into the next chapter, where the questions grow sharper, the stakes grow higher, and the answers remain just out of reach. Because if the courts have shut down one path, others will surely be tried, and the clash between presidential authority, judicial oversight, and human survival is far from over. And as the cameras roll, as politicians posture, and as families wait in silence for news that could change their lives overnight, one truth becomes undeniable. This is not the conclusion, it is only the escalation, and the most critical moment has not yet arrived. And now, as this battle reaches its boiling point, the pieces on the board are shifting faster than anyone can predict, and the tension that has been building finally collides in a single truth too powerful to ignore. This fight is not just about Venezuelans, or about Trump, or about one obscure law from the 1700s, it's about what kind of country America chooses to be when it is tested. The appeals court ruling has forced the nation to confront a choice that cannot be delayed forever. Will the United States lean on the ghosts of outdated statutes to justify fear-driven policies, or will it carve out a new path that reflects the reality of today's crises and the values it claims to defend? The payoff moment comes here, because suddenly it becomes clear that the Alien Enemies Act is not just a legal footnote, but a mirror, reflecting America's deepest anxieties about outsiders, power, and identity. For families who fled violence and repression in Venezuela, the ruling is a temporary shield, but for the broader nation, it is a test of conscience. Will America protect the vulnerable, or will it weaponize laws that were never meant for them? And the courts, by slamming the brakes on Trump's attempt, have thrown that question back to the people, reminding everyone that judges can only interpret, not solve, the moral dilemmas of a divided country. That realization lands like a cinematic thunderclap. The law can close doors, the president can push limits, Congress can stall and bicker, but in the end, it is the collective choice of the nation, through its votes, its protests, its silence, or its action, that will decide which path is taken. And the consequences of that choice won't just shape immigration policy, they will shape the very definition of freedom, power, and justice in the United States for decades to come. Because if fear wins, then presidents of the future may find themselves armed with unchecked powers that can be turned on anyone labeled an enemy. But if compassion and restraint win, then perhaps America will finally prove that it can adapt its laws without losing its soul. And so the story ends here, not with neat resolution, but with the weight of an unanswered question hanging heavy in the air, a question meant for every viewer, every voter, every citizen. When history looks back on this moment, when it remembers the clash of old laws and modern lives, what will it say about us? Did we let fear dictate our future, or did we choose something greater?